What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? This is Sean from Lineup Logic DFS, the podcast, bringing you more All-Star Break content here where we are talking MLB DFS research methods. I wanted to dive into hitters, and I apologize for not having this video ready earlier today. The almighty grail of MLB research, Fangraphs, was down for a good portion of the afternoon, so better late than never. I hope you guys get to this, and I hope you enjoy it. We are going to go ahead and figure out how we target stacks, or excuse me, how we create or find offenses that we're interested in stacking. And if you looked at my videos on pitcher research, a lot of this centers around pitcher research and process there as well. So very similar process. I'm looking for outliers. I'm looking for the guys who are on the fringe in certain ways, in certain statistics and measurables. And I'm looking for, trends that perhaps people aren't looking at. But I want to say there's a couple things that I do before any slate when I consider when I'm looking for stacks. And the first thing that I'm always going to look at is Vegas and the weather. And, this is the RotoGrinders lineup page. It's a great resource. This is now updated to Friday, July 14th. We don't have Vegas's take on the slate. But what we do have is we do have our matchups here. And what you normally will see is an implied team total right there. And what I'm looking for is outliers in positive weather, negative weather, and Vegas totals. So anything that seems to be over a 9.5 run total, that's what I would consider an outlier. Any wind that's over 8 or 9 miles per hour out directionally, I would consider that an outlier. Any weather that's above 85 degrees, I would consider that an outlier. Those are trends and situations that Vegas takes into consideration, the weather, ballpark, etc., that can benefit hitters. So they're going to adjust the total accordingly. So you don't need to value it too much when you're looking at the total, but I do think it's somewhere that you can find a way to help you make decisions about whether or not you're interested in an offense. So let's look through some of these. Let's look through some of these games. If you notice already right off the bat, I've got two negative weather situations in New York and Baltimore. Possibly also the Red Sox, 64 degrees with the wind blowing in. That's going to take away a lot of the advantage in Fenway Park. Whereas you see in Cincinnati, a ballpark that's already great for hitters, we've got a wind blowing out at 10 miles per hour. That's excellent, right? That's definitely a situation that we're interested in. Whereas in Atlanta, we've got 84 degrees with 66% humidity. That's great hitting. Those are great hitting conditions as well. So I'm looking for these outliers. And other than that, I don't see anything. Perhaps, Oakland, wind blowing out. But of course, we know that's a big ballpark, so that perhaps that advantage isn't as great as we might think. But we see some of these other situations that are beneficial as far as weather. When we're looking at Atlanta, we're looking at Cincinnati. Those are really good situations just right off the bat to keep in our mind here. That's the first thing I'm going to look at. Then I'm going to go over and I'm going to get all my pitchers in one place. And this is the same place I started with my research for pitcher selection. But now I'm going to use it to figure out slates. And what I'm looking for is kind of the opposite of what I was looking for in pitcher selection. And that starts for me with Sierra. Obviously, you're going to find the worst pitchers. Sierra is a skill interactive ERA. It is a metric that measures beyond ERA. And we see some names that we know have gotten beaten up this year. Aaron Sanchez just gave up a ton of runs to the Astros. R.A. Dickey, he's kind of been a whipping boy throughout the course of the year. We know he's going to be in Atlanta. That could be a good ballpark situation. Martin Perez of the Rangers, he continues to get beat up. We're going to notice some of these other names. Kevin Gausman's interesting because he's kind of trending in different directions. Justin Verlander, not someone you'd expect to see there, but the statistics don't lie. So already I'm noticing a couple names up here that I'm interested in going after, perhaps R.A. Dickey or Martin Perez. I'm going to make a note of those. And I'm going to check to see who those guys are playing. It looks like where is the Braves game? The Braves game, the Diamondbacks versus Dickey. Diamondbacks versus Dickey. That's interesting for a couple reasons. Obviously, Dickey, knuckleballer. We'll have to see how they do there. And then we're also going to consider, where was this? We were looking at Perez. There he is. Royals versus Perez, perhaps. We'll look at them. Interesting. Perception is the Royals, by the way, are a bad offense. Not the case. We'll look at the splits. Two names to consider there when we're looking at Sierra. Okay. We'll move on. We'll look at some of the other statistics here. One of the things that I like to look at is also XFIP. This to kind of equates for walk rate as well to kind of see how many other names we get up there. Jason Hamill all of a sudden pops up into that one, onto that list. So he is certainly someone that perhaps we could get interested in targeting. But I'm also going to look at some of these other batted ball type statistics. I'm going to look at K to walk ratio. I want to look at home runs per 9. And we're going to see things that are really, fantasy valuable and valuable in some of these batted ball statistics. That's where you really get. So all of a sudden, Ricky Nolasco and Aaron Sanchez pop up on that list. We're going to have to think about also Tim Adelman, who's got the Nationals, and we already talked about that ballpark, right? We already talked about how that ballpark is in a good situation for weather and hitters. So the Nats versus Adelman is certainly interesting. I'm not going to ignore the fact that Aaron Sanchez is going up against the Tigers. But of course, guys, remember, I'm not going to stack all of these teams. I'm just going to be keeping them in mind, and I wanted to make a note of some of these, right? What I'm going to have to figure out is where do some of these ideas align, right? And I also see Nick Pivetta up here. He's interesting for sure. He has a matchup in a small ballpark in Philadelphia versus the Brewers. So I'm very interested in that. Now, what I'll do from here is I'll kind of get some ideas going, and I'm going to bop over to batted ball data, and I'm going to go ahead now and figure out who has the worst hard hit rate. Hard hit rate is so valuable. You want to be able to find pitchers who are giving up well-struck balls. Your batting average goes up immediately on these hard hit balls. We can't compromise on that. We have to target guys with hard hit rates that are very high. And I'm going to sort here by hard hit rate, and I see Nolasco up there, Verlander, DeGrom, Cueto. These are interesting names because these are guys who have strikeout potential, but they also get hit pretty hard. Again, Perez pops up and Pivetta pops up for me. So some of these names I hadn't seen yet: Nolasco, Verlander, DeGrom, Cueto. Although Verlander is certainly someone that we're not afraid of stacking against these days. I'm not stacking against Jake DeGrom. And I'll look at Johnny Cueto, but it is the Padres offense that we're talking about there. So Perez and Pivetta pop up on that list with 34, almost 35% hard hit rate. I'm going to look at fly balls too, because fly balls really matter in fantasy baseball. Dan Straley, fly ball pitcher. Tim Adelman, there he is again. So that's a good situation. And Nick Pivetta. Those are two names that keep popping up on this list. So Tim Adelman and Nick Pivetta seem to be popping up continuously on these lists. One of the other ones that I'm going to sort by home run to fly ball ratio. How many of those home runs actually fly balls turn into home runs? Okay, Michael Pineda isn't giving up a lot of hard contact, but when he does, it's turning into home runs. Aaron Sanchez, again, at the top of that list. Nolasco, 19%. DeGrom has struggled with home runs. We know that. And again, we see two other names that we're familiar with, Adelman and Pivetta. So let's go ahead and let's decide which one of these stacks we want to dive into and research, which one of these teams we're interested in. And in my mind, it's got to be Adelman, and it's got to be the Nats versus Adelman, because I already had this weather situation that I was looking at. So I'm going to go ahead and dive into the Tim Adelman, and I'm going to try to figure out where his weaknesses lie. So my interest is primarily now with the Nationals offense versus Adelman. And I want to figure out what's the deal with Adelman. Is it righties? Is it lefties? Is it home? Is it the road? What's the problem that he's facing this year? we look at this. His K rate, swinging strike rate are pretty respectable. His walk rate is a little bit elevated, so maybe that's part of his problem, which brings his K to walk ratio down more than you want. We also see he's got a 44% fly ball rate. That's just too high. He's giving up way more fly balls than ground balls. That's awesome for us. We want that. And he's giving up 32% hard contact. Not an immense number, but it certainly is something that seems to be affecting his Sierra and his XFIP. We'll go to his splits and figure out who's hitting him harder. And it seems to me like it's the lefties that he struggles with. His XFIP is up at 6.04 when the lefties, 3.9 to righties, which means he's a respectable kind of league average pitcher against righties. K rate 26%. But against lefties, he's really, really struggled. You see the walk rate is elevated there as well. We'll look now at the batted ball data. Okay, and what we're going to look for here, of course, is hard hit rate, which is right there. Now, more hard hits to righties than lefties, but an equal distribution of home runs to fly balls and way more fly balls to lefties. Let's see how this plays at home. At home, we know Great American Ballpark is a problem for him, and you look at this home run fly ball ratio. He's got 20% home run fly ball ratio in Great American Ballpark. Versus lefties, that's the highest rate he has at 21.9%. So we are certainly interested in the Nationals lefties here in this spot, which makes sense. You know, there's a lot of good lefties to target on this Nationals team. So let's figure out which Nationals lefties we want to go after with Tim Adelman. What I'm going to use now is I'm going to use this tool over here at RotoGrinders. This is just an excellent thing. This is one of the things that they will do. You just go down here to the Nationals and you can find out the Nationals splits versus right-handed pitching. Okay? And it may not populate because it will populate. I was going to say I was worried it was because it's not game day. But what we can look at is on the season here in 2017, what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort this by WOBA. Okay? I want to see who has the best weighted on base average versus righties on the Nationals. Now I see Ryan Rayburn pop up there. That doesn't mean I'm rushing to roster Ryan Rayburn because of this small sample size. 21 at-bats isn't really a huge sample size and only 6 games played. But of course we see obvious names here. Bryce Harper, Ryan Zimmerman, Daniel Murphy. I love all 3 of those names, okay? But what I really am interested in here is actually Adam Lind. We know that Adam Lind sometimes is a platoon guy, a lefty, who may get in there versus righties. He has a nice 385 WOBA against right-handed pitching and a 227 ISO, isolated slugging, right? When we see those kinds of numbers, we know that this guy has pop. We know he has the platoon advantage, and we know he probably has the pricing advantage because he's not the everyday first baseman. So if Adam Lind is in the lineup, that's certainly a name that I'm interested in. But for the time being, I'm going to be very comfortable rostering any combination of Harper, Zimmerman, Murphy, and Lind. Now, I know that's not a screaming hot take. Great, Sean, you're going to play Bryce Harper against a shitty right-hander. I understand that. All I'm pointing out is my process of how I can arrive at a conclusion that actually makes sense. Why I think that this is the case. Okay? Now, if I wanted to be a little bit more interesting or a little bit more contrarian, or I wanted to find some leverage on the field, I'm going to go down to what I probably will know is that more towards the bottom of the order to a guy maybe like a Michael Taylor, who's a little bit less recognized, but playing the outfield for the Nationals. We see his metrics at 220 and 343. Those are excellent numbers versus right-handers. Those are excellent numbers versus right-handers. So you don't necessarily have to pay up for Bryce Harper's unbelievable numbers when you have a guy here in Taylor who's been hitting the ball at a very above average rate. So you can easily look at some of these, guys and perhaps decide, what are some guys that maybe I'm not super interested in. Matt Wieters, for example, not interested in him, the catching position, and doesn't seem to be in a good spot for the Nationals. So there it is. I figured out that maybe the Nats are a stack that I'm interested in, and more particularly, I'm interested in getting the lefties at Great American Ballpark. But if I don't want to pay up for Bryce Harper, perhaps I'll pay down for a guy like Michael Taylor. And if Adam Lind is in the lineup, then I'm going to feel very comfortable rostering Adam Lind against Adelman in Great American Ballpark. So that's my process, guys. The last thing that I will probably do is I will affirm what I already know via a resource that I can't stress the value of enough. And that's Casey Boguslaw's MLB Barrel Chart. Casey puts out a chart just like this every day with different stats on pitchers and their opponent. And what I'm going to look at most closely is his barrel rate. If you don't know what a barrel is, go to Lineup Logic DFS, listen to the interview that I did with Casey about barrels. He talks about how a barrel is basically a perfectly hit baseball. It's a baseball with an exit velocity above 90 miles an hour, and that has a certain launch angle and a hit probability over 50%. So when we look at barrel rate, we want pitchers that give up a ton of barrels. They're sorted here. You look towards the bottom to affirm that the guy you're going up against is, in fact, going to give up those barrels, those well-struck balls. Now, this is from a previous slate. He hasn't published it for Fridays, but this is a great tool and a really quick and easy reference tool for you to use. Certainly one that I recommend. Follow Casey Boguslaw at Casey Boguslaw on Twitter and at MLB Barrel Alert on Twitter to get that on a daily basis. So that's it, guys. Quick summary. Looking at pitchers, I'm sorting by Sierra via advanced data. I'm getting a sense of who the worst pitcher on the slate is. It is a general rule. Then I'm going to go over to batted ball data, and I'm going to try to determine who gives up the most hard hits. Sort by hard contact, sort by home run to fly ball ratio, fly balls. Those kinds of things are most valuable in MLB DFS. And once I determine there's names popping up on, the frequency of them popping up in the top 5, that's when I know you have truly a bad pitcher. And I'm going to go ahead and investigate, determine the splits, go over here to splits, look how he fares versus righties versus lefties, look how he fares on the road versus home, and try to determine where the advantage is against going up against this pitcher. Where's the weakest spot in his game? And I'll talk even more about pitcher weaknesses and exploiting them with bats in my next video about advanced batter research. So keep an eye out for that. Should be coming up in the next day or so. Thanks a lot, guys.